Started. Angela and I are going to do this one together. And I believe, Angela, you're going to kick us off. So I'm going to turn it over to her. Both of us work at Truman Library, as you know. And we're going to be talking this afternoon about, obviously the theme is Constitution. So it's about the steel crisis in particular. And here we go. You probably just need to go to the beginning. There we are. So I'm going to turn it over to Angela, and we'll hope you enjoy this presentation this afternoon.
Well, hello. Glad to be back with you guys. And I don't know if that's on your screen. I'm trying to move that other way. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and start here. Mark and I, as you know, are at the Harry S. Truman Library and Museum, and I have a really cool picture. We just had our soft opening about a week or so ago to reveal our new Harry S. Truman statue standing up in front, welcoming everyone to our new entrance. So this is our new entrance. I think that is Clifton Daniel, who's the grandson of President Truman, who was out speaking, and we had the Navy band there, and that was a little over a week ago. And as Mark was saying, we're just right now it's limited number. You can buy the tickets online, and it's just a limited number that can come in. And I'm not allowed to say anything else because he's going to be showing you more on Friday. So
you can say whatever you want, Angela. You can give a first review of the new museum. How's that?
Well, it has the wow factor. I've heard a lot of great things, and I think it's wonderful. And I hope you guys, for those of you who don't live in the area, can travel and come and see us. So I'll just leave it at that and let Mark take it away on Friday and show you the inside. So we are talking about presidents in the Constitution, and the best way to do that with President Truman is to look at the steel seizure case. It pretty much, we have another crisis today, and it is with the steel companies and what's going on there. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but it does encompass checks and balances, the separation of powers, implied, inherent powers, and all of those things are involved in this court case with President Truman. So we're going to start off with a video. Everyone should be able to hear this. So Mark, give me a thumbs up if you don't. I'm going to go ahead and start this. This is the first primary source that I'm going to be showing in the form of a video. It's President Truman making the announcement, what he's going to do.
With American troops facing the enemy on the field of battle, I would not be living up to my oath of office if I fail to do whatever is required to provide them with weapons and ammunition they need for their survival. Therefore, I am taking two actions. First, I am directing the Secretary of Commerce to take possession of the steel mills and to keep them operating.
The issue in this story is the power of the president and its limits. Not often is the president's authority directly attacked in a lawsuit, but that is what happened in the administration of Harry S. Truman in the second year of the Korean War, when he ordered the federal government to seize the major steel mills of the United States. The legality of that action, debated with intense feeling, was finally resolved by the United States Supreme Court. This is the story of its ruling and the conflict that led to it. The story of a president's power contested.
Okay, it makes me go out. I have to go back out and come here. Okay, so you just saw President Truman telling you about what he was going to do. And when we look at these primary sources, we like to use visual thinking strategies. And so if you think about his tone, think about why was he addressing the American people, and You know, how did he feel about it? Those are different things that you can use in the classroom. One of the things that he said is he was going to seize the plants and the personal, the private property, but he was also going to invite, he thought that would invite people, the owners and the workers, to actually come together in Washington and make some decisions. So to look at this, another thing it said, I think is pretty interesting, is when it says, not often do we see the presidents attacked in a personal lawsuit. That seems to be going on a lot more frequent these days, I think, than it did at that time. But to look back just a little bit about the time, a little bit of background, we're going to look at post-World War II, look at the economy. It was booming. There was a lot of concerns with inflation at the time, some shortages. So a lot of workers were demanding more money, a lot of things going on with strikes. Over 2 million people were striking. So the Congress decided the way to handle that was with the Taft-Hartley Act. And so they came up with this act, and basically it banned these workers from doing any kind of strategies to protest, to boycott, to strike the mills or the industries. It did allow the president to have like a cooling period for 80 days, so he could stop that strike for 80 days. But it did limit and restrict him from seizing anything. And President Truman wasn't very happy about that. He felt like it took the power away from the workers. It took away their voice, and he said it gave all the power to the owners. And so he vetoed that bill. Congress came back and they overrode his veto, and they passed it anyway. So this is the 80th Congress, and President Truman, when he was running for election, he called him the Do-Nothing Congress. He had more complaints about his Congress than he did his actual opponent, Dewey. This is when, as earlier in the week, when we talked about the violence against the veterans returning from the war and the African Americans, and he set up that commission. They had come back with over 35 recommendations to proposals and what to do to stop this violence. And he had sent that to Congress, and it was crickets, heard nothing. So he wasn't getting much out of his Congress. He wasn't very happy with them. And so when North Korea invaded South Korea, he never went to Congress to get that approved. It was never officially a war or a declaration because it was never approved through Congress. It became more of a Korean conflict. So, but they did give him the Defense Production Act, okay, they did, which allowed him to set prices and set a ceiling on prices so he could get all the goods that he needed. But then when he heard of the strike, the union leaders were promising a strike. The contract was up in December 31st. He said, you know, this is a crisis. We need this steel. This is what's going to protect our soldiers. So, you know, he's got soldiers. He's a commander in chief. And so this is, he needs the weapons. He needs the ammunition. So rather than using the Taft-Hartley bill, which he had vetoed earlier, he went another route. He went through the Wage and the Stabilization Board, and that's where they came together. They tried to negotiate. They had panels. They did a lot of different things to try to calm this down, and they couldn't get anything negotiated. All of it failed. And so that's when he came up with the executive order and said he will just take over this. So as you can imagine, this is what came out, you know, right around that time. This is a political cartoon. This is a great way we use the visual thinking strategies, and it's a great introduction to this subject. As with primary sources, they don't always give you all of the information, but hopefully they spur a discussion. Hopefully it gets you inspired to want to learn more about it. So if you guys would, in your chat, and Mark, he's gonna check this for me. Tell me, what do you see in this political cartoon? Type in your chat, what is it that you see?
Don't be shy. We want your participation.
They weren't ready to get to work, were they?
Right. We jumped in right in. That's good. Kate says busting through the Constitution. Michael says presidential overreach. Now they're all flying in. Hang on. Presidential overreach. Diane says big hand of the president. Darren Griffin says communism. Donna says presidential overreach of the Constitution. Lynette says overreach. Elizabeth says big government attacking private property. Jennifer says overreaching hand of Big Brother. Phil says, this is interesting, dehumanization of the president. Rocky says autocratic. Constitution being destroyed by overreach, says Denise. Tricia says seizure. Breaking the Constitution, says Rebecca. Diana Haywood says private property is the little guy. And Shelley says seizure of private property, breaking the Constitution. Those are great. I'm sorry if I said
that is
those.
great. And
I'm
you know,
sorry if I said those a little quickly, but there was a lot.
yeah. Once we woke everybody up, right? You know, what's interesting is the overreach. That's what we've been talking about pretty much all week long. So, you know, based on some of the past presentations that you've seen, you could change out that private property and you could put in other things, because basically it's about the overreach of the president and all the different crises that we've been talking about. Is there anything else you see in there? What else do you see? Anybody else?
Lindsay asked a question. Is the hand wearing a glove? Is he trying to conceal his actions with the Constitution? And Rocky says maybe a symbol of communism. So those are the two other comments there.
That's a new one. It does.
Can I interject a little bit there, Angela?
Yes.
Sometimes with these visual thinking things, they raise more questions than answers. And often when a student comes up with a comment, I try to follow that up with what makes you say that. Trying to get them to not just say the first thing that they see, but make them to think a little bit about, so what do you notice? And then what makes you say that? So what evidence is there in the image? Kevin adds a presidential grab of private property added to that. So those are all great observations. Back to you,
Yes.
Angela.
Thank you. Yes, yes, it is, and this is the thought, you know, that people were having. This was the audience was the public, and this is what they were looking at. So as you've seen, I think Katie and Josh have mentioned this. This is the guides. We have some guides through archives.gov for the classroom to help you analyze primary sources. In this case, a cartoon. There's also one for the video. There's for artifacts and for primary sources. And it's a guide that you can use with your students in the classroom. And hopefully that political cartoon inspires more thought. You know, what is going on? How come that's true? So with that being said, we are going to go to a breakout session. And these are the questions that we're going to ask you to look at. And I'll turn it over to Mark.
Yeah, so I'm going to put, if I can navigate my computer, I'm going to put the questions in the chat. You're going to be broken into 8 groups. So let me see if I can figure out this. Group 1 through 4 are going to answer that question. And again, the beauty of copy and paste, and groups. And we're going to be referring to the radio address, the TV address that you should have done for homework, but I'll put that link in as well. So in a moment, there's 2 steps here. You're going to be looking at the radio address that you should have already looked at, but I'm going to put that link in as well. There's going to be 8 groups randomly assigned. So group 1 through 4, the first question: what were the reactions and arguments from the steel owners to the radio address? And then groups 5 through 8 will be looking at the reaction from the steel workers. So that's the 2 sides of the conflict. So group 1 through 4 is the owners, group 5 through 8 are the workers. And if you need the address, the radio and TV address, again, you can right click on that and you'll get that transcript. Therese, one quick question. Will they know which room number they are in?
It should show up for them, yeah, to tell them what breakout they're in.
So before we break into the rooms, do you have any questions about the activity? And we're just going to do 5 minutes. So group 1 through 4, reactions from the mill owners. Groups 5 through 8, the workers. And then and it's a lengthy speech, but yeah, if you've already looked at it, it should go a little quicker. And it's very direct. So I think you won't have any trouble. There's not much subtlety in Truman's address. So any questions? Everyone clear on the assignment? And then Angela and I will drop in and out if we can. Therese, if we have the capability to drop in and out of all of the groups. Yep. All right, then we're ready to go. And we're going to need a spokesperson from each group. So remember that part as we did before lunch. So elect a spokesperson or assign somebody, and then we'll come on back in 5 minutes. So from room 1, which according to my list was Denise, Darren, Donna, Shauna, and Shelley, do we have a spokesperson from room 1?
Spokesperson is me.
Thank you so much for doing that.
No problem. We believed that the steel mill owners didn't like the fact that their property was being seized, taken. They didn't like somebody else calling shots. They wanted to keep their profit margins as high as possible, and they were not willing to concede or negotiate. And we saw that because of the length of time that they had been in negotiations. And really, the constitutional issue, the president can't do this, only Congress can make laws. And we also discussed there was no declared war. So were we truly in a crisis? Was this truly needed?
Right, and just to reiterate, thank you. And somebody put in the chat earlier that Truman actually went to the United Nations. It was the first time the United Nations had been used. Just as a fun fact, Truman comes into power in April of 1945. The United Nations begins in June of that same year. And this is the first time the United Nations is asked for. We're going to jump to room 5 because that was the workers. So we get the contrasting opinion. And that would be either Jay, Phil, Stephen, or Tanya. Who's your spokesperson?
I lost the rock, paper, scissors battle, so here I go.
I wish I'd watched that virtually. That would have been great.
It was a tie 3 times with scissors. So. We as workers felt that we had an advocate in the president, and we were happy with this speech because the president was able to show that as the pay raises we were asking for were reasonable, and we were not out of line compared to other industries in gaining a pay raise, and that the steel mills owners were not going to lose much in profit. They could absorb the cost of our pay raises. And that was our arguments for why we approved of this speech. Although we were worried about maybe losing some bargaining power when the nationalization of the industry would end.
Very good. Thank you for that, Tanya. And if we're going to switch back now to group 2, so we're back to the mill owners. So do we have a spokesperson from room 2?
I guess you get me, Mark.
All right, Dan. No, it's my pleasure. By the way, on the last group, I do need to know later on whether your scissors in your game were made of steel. And now we'll go to Diane. That's my corny joke of the day.
I wasn't sure if you skipped group 2 or we got lost because I got thrown out.
Group 2 next. Yeah.
Okay. As the steel owners, we felt that we had every right to raise prices. We believed that the workers were being fairly compensated. We didn't have any problem with their working conditions. We felt that we were providing something to the people that needed to be paid for properly. And obviously Harry didn't feel that way. Harry came down really hard on the steel owners, accused them of not cooperating. We did not bargain with our workers. We chose not to do that. We did not come to the table with them.
Very good. Thank you, Diane. I'm sorry you got kicked off.
That's all right.
We're going to go to room 6. Room 6. And then room 3 is on deck after 6. Do we have a spokesperson for room 6? Do I need to call them out?
Call them out. Is that us?
It is. Yes, that's
Oh.
you, Kevin.
Yeah.
I know you're shy and retiring, so we'll let you take it over.
I got outvoted. There wasn't any paper scissors. It was a straight vote.
There you go.
We really emphasized the fact that the steelworkers had to be pleased. You had a president rooting and cheering them on because they reduced and accepted a reduced wage increase that was below what they originally sought to. And then he continually pointed out how the steel mills could absorb that wage increase without the need to increase the price of steel. And then with the increased price of steel that they would have been allowed, the profits would have continued to grow even higher in spite of the wage increases. So I think he really laid it out that the union workers had done their duty. They were willing to accept less just to get even with other workers in the nation in similar industries. So we were really, but to hear a president that strongly supporting a union, particularly considering the way the politics have been the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years, was really different.
Thank you, Kevin. That's a good summary. We're now going to room 3, and room 7 will be on deck. So room 3 is next. Who is your spokesperson? And that would be either Beth, Lindsay, Melissa, or Rebecca.
I'll go ahead.
Thank you,
I
Beth.
guess that we thought that the owners felt vilified. The president went after them and really made them look like they didn't care about the country. In effect, they didn't care about the common consumer either, because what would happen with steel prices for everyone else. And so he actually just said, you're not following the rules. The rules have been laid down under laws enacted by Congress, and they are applied by fair, impartial government boards and agencies. And everybody agrees to the rules. The union agrees to the rules, but not those owners. They're just not even patriotic. They don't want to play the good role of being a patriotic American. So he did a really good job of making them look bad.
Yeah, and even throwing in the Korean War and the emotional aspect of that, right? So that was good. Thank you, Beth. And the next is room 7. And after that, we're going to have room 4. So room 7.
Not as eloquent as other people, but we felt maybe that the steel workers were in support of this. They felt like they did have a spokesperson in the president. However, maybe a little concerned because even though they have a new so-called owner, they're still not getting a raise. We're still at the same place. And are we allowed to strike against then possibly the government to get that raise? Because we appreciate the voice, but nothing's it's still the same.
Yeah, very good. I like that perspective. I like that we're getting a different perspective there. Thank you very much. And then room 4.
Yep. I just have one thing to add to the owner group. We felt like the owners felt like the workers were not negotiating and not bargaining in good faith.
Very good. That's an additional detail we hadn't talked about. So thank you for that, Michael. And then finally, room 8, and hopefully not everything has been said, but what do we have from room 8?
Pretty much the same thing that everyone else has said. We were ecstatic on the president's remarks. It's great to see him being such a champion of labor and the union, and not so much a tool of big business.
Thank you, Rocky. And just to throw it to the whole group now, just to wrap this part up. When I like to speeches, I often use, those document analysis sheets that we've been talking a lot about. One of the questions for an audio document analysis sheet on there, I'm just going to focus on one. I don't need to throw it on the screen. they often ask about tone, the tone and the mood of the speaker. Now you're just looking at a written transcript, but I think it's pretty clear to me the tone and the mood comes across, and you can just use your audio for this. You don't necessarily need to type it. How would you describe Truman's tone in that radio and TV address? Anybody?
I would say it's just borderline hostility.
Yeah. Yeah, hostility is good. What anybody else got other adjectives or ways to describe his tone and mood in that particular address?
Indignant.
Indignant. That's good.
Righteous.
Righteous.
Truman.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Because he keeps using the word fact of the matter. You know, fact of the matter. This is, I have it on my side.
Yeah, he's getting advice, and the advice is telling him that he's right. Right. Even Supreme Court Justice Vinson has given him some advice. And
Truman is very determined to move on to get some action because he wants to make the military, the soldiers survive from the war.
Right. So that's
must do something.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, he feels like it's, it is a crisis. We're at war in Korea. He's not necessarily thinking about whether he should have gone to Congress or not, but we're at war and they need the steel to provide the materials. Yeah.
Got a visual aid.
There we go. There's the visual aid right there. And I'll show you the new location. Not that it's in the same location, but it's in a new case. So you will see that on Friday. Anything else anyone wants to add about that? Any other things that, just to think briefly about maybe how you would use this type of document with your students? And then I'll throw it back to Angela here in a second. One thing I thought about is maybe other perspectives, right? We just looked at the workers and the mill owners. What about Congress? What about Republicans? What about Democrats? What about Supreme Court justices? Because that's where it's going, right? That's the next step that Angela's going to talk about. So one way you could do, we didn't do it for this because we didn't really want to deal with the cumbersome nature of that, but you could look at this from 5 or 6 perspectives and do your breakouts in the classroom with, Republicans, Democrats, Supreme Court justice, congressional, whatever it might be. His own advisors were giving him advice. A lot of the biographers that have written on this since that time have not necessarily let Truman off the hook. They certainly say he overreaches, and Supreme Court says that too, but they do feel like he gets bad advice. And so they kind of put some of the advisors and his legal advice kind of on the hook as well. So that's going to end my part. Thank you for participating in that part of it. We're going to wrap things up. Angela has a few more things she wants to share, but thank you for participating in that section.
I'm going to share my screen again because, I think that one. Because while you guys were talking, I did a graphic organizer, and so I separated it into 3 different perspectives. Well, dang it. Sorry.
You had it there first. There you go.
There it is. Okay. So I separated it in what you guys were saying, the steel owners. So this is a good way to, visualize what you guys just came up with. So the steel owners, summarize unconstitutional. The government can't take away our private property. It cuts into their profits. We have the right to raise the prices, and we've fairly compensated, our workers. We provide jobs, and the workers have chose not to bargain, but we have, so we've been vilified. The president makes them look bad, and they're not happy about that. And the workers were not negotiating in good faith. So that pretty well summarizes what you guys got from the speech from President Truman. And on the other hand, the steel workers. The president's an advocate. He affirmed our pay increase. He's concerned about the bargaining power, so you guys all felt that he was supportive. And even to the point to where it came to, he's supportive, but it's still not getting done. So now what? We're still not getting a raise, even with that support. But it's nice to have him as a champion of labor. And we didn't do President Truman's, but basically, he says this war, I need these to stay open. This is going to sacrifice our national defense, the lives of our soldiers, and the Constitution gives me those inherent powers. They're vested in me as the commander-in-chief during an emergency. So there are your different perspectives that you guys work to come up with, and President Truman's. And as you can see, if you look at the headline, this court case was called Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer. And the headlines, the steel seizure was ruled illegal. So when it went to the Supreme Court, a 6-3 decision decided that the president is limited. He doesn't have the power to seize private property. It also says that, Congress is the only one who can pass laws, not the president. There was no act of Congress. And it also says that, he had the choice to use the congressional, like the Taft-Hartley bill, and he chose not to use that. And that was, an avenue to use the constitutional or the congressional act. So he was not very happy about that. He never got over that. He actually had, I think, appointed like 5 of those judges, and he couldn't believe that they went against him like that. So it was turned back over to the steel mills, and ultimately it didn't really affect the soldiers. It didn't really affect anything. And ultimately, I believe, Mark, you can, let me take this off of here. But Mark, you can add to that. Ultimately, it didn't affect anything. I mean, they did the same thing in the end, right?
Yeah, and they did go on strike all the way into June, which was very costly. We have a number of questions though, so let me get to the questions.
Okay, I'm trying to stop sharing here and I can't find. There it is. There's my button.
There we go.
Sorry.
Now,
okay,
now I
there
can
you
see.
go.
Let me scroll back up. Give me a second here to look at the questions. There's some discussion about his public opinion at the time. It was low. Mostly, there are things like MacArthur firing and so on, but mostly because of the Korean War. And you have to remember, this is in 52. So he only has about 6 months left in office, and he's already decided he's not going to run again. But his public opinion ratings at that time were already low. And when you asked about public opinion, I think that background essay mentions a few of the, not so much public opinion, but certainly the media reaction. Newspapers and magazines vilified Truman. And some of those, if anybody has the David McCullough biography, there's a few quotes from some of the magazines and newspapers from the time who really go after Truman in the media as well as the public. So his opinion is pretty low there in terms of public opinion. Let me just scroll down and make sure there's a lot of questions, or at least comments. Yeah, his ratings go up, but not really until after he leaves office. By the time he leaves office, it's pretty low. But since then, C-SPAN did their annual thing last week, and he ended up as the 6th best president. So it's changed a lot since 1952. So the question is, do you think things would have been different if Korea had been an officially declared war? Here's the trick with that. This is my opinion. I don't think Congress would have passed it. That's the trouble he had, because Congress was so opposed to most of the things he was doing. That's not to say it could have happened. He was able to get through things like, the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan and things like that. But there was some debate about whether Congress would have approved going to war in Korea. They may have done. It's hard to know. That is a really good question. I like hypotheticals. Diane, ED, are you talking executive order? Is that what maybe ED would have worked?
Eminent domain.
Oh, I'm sorry, eminent domain. Yeah, Truman was all about executive orders. And so that was kind of his role. His lawyers, though, they really led him down the wrong path. I think that's, and so I don't know whether eminent domain, whether they tried that or not. I think I got most of the questions. I kind of wanted to tie this back in to finish up. And if you've got more questions, please put them in there. In some of the other things we've already talked about this week, some of the other presidential actions, thinking back to Angela's cartoon of the presidential hand breaking through the Constitution and seizing property. It could be Iraq. It could be, at the bottom of the picture instead of private property. It could be any of those issues that the president tries to this idea of presidential overreach comes through very well in that cartoon. And then, Angela, if you don't mind, can you share that last slide again? And there's a link on there to the inquiries lesson.
Yes.
That some teachers did, because that has another
Yes.
cartoon on that one. So at this last slide,
This one here?
we've got these resources, and this is already on the Truman Library webpage. And then the last link, can you pull that
You want me
link
to
up?
open it?
If you could, yeah, if you could link to that. This is a lesson plan that was done using the inquiry method. Oh, that's a different one, but that's okay. There's another one too, actually. But this was one that was done by Jared. Let me find the other one. If you can close your screen for a minute, there is a different one I was thinking about, and I'll pull it up here real quick. Sorry about that. Navigating all these windows is always so much fun.
And while he's doing that,
yeah, I got it.
We have a lot. Oh, did you get it? We have a lot of teachers' lesson plans that have already been done by teachers, so they're all open to everyone. We've added new inquiry lessons, so there's a lot of inquiry-based lessons.
Can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
So this is a number of inquiry lessons that have been created all by teachers, not by me. And the Steel Strike one is here. And this has a really interesting one because I just saw in the chat some reference to this and the idea of inherent powers. And this one, cartoon of the week, Harry the First, which I just think is a great caption. And even if it doesn't really matter almost what issue you're dealing with, this is obviously related to the steel crisis. But it kind of starts the topic off with a really good way to discuss what are inherent powers? What is the cartoonist saying here? I love the fact that they use a crown and then they use this title and then it goes into the whole lesson. And this has the radio address and letters from different people. Some other cartoons. I'll just show this real quick. Can you still see that? Sometimes, yes. Yeah, so there's a letter, but there's another cartoon here, which gets back to the three branches of government. So you've got the chalkboard there with the executive arm with the big muscle, anatomy of government, the legislative arm, and then Truman saying, anyone want to make anything of it? And what do we have down here? The Supreme Court. So I love that one too. So I will drop that link to that particular lesson that was done by some teachers a couple of summers ago. And I'll stop the share. And Rocky had said imperial presidency, which is kind of what a couple of those cartoons were getting at. So I like that idea of, how you can bring back to those three branches of government, because you do have a congressional role with the Taft-Hartley Act and with the declaration of war, right? You got two things he could have used there, didn't. Supreme Court obviously steps in and rules against him. I wanted to tie in, I'm glad I mentioned that, I wanted to tie into something that Jeff brought up yesterday with the Supreme Court there and the packing of the courts. There is some historian that say that because the Supreme Court went along with so much of FDR's work, that by the time they got to Truman, they were ready to reset the balance. I think there's something to be said for that thesis. It's not entirely accurate. They did rule over some FDR things, and they certainly ruled in favor with Truman on some, but this was a case where they felt like maybe redressing the balance a little bit. I think that's a fair argument, a fair discussion to have. if you look at kind of the Supreme Court cases that actually affect the president themselves, that'd be an interesting thing to explore. So that's just another way of looking at that. It's like, well, we've given FDR everything. It's time to reset the balance a little bit. And then looking forward, it came up with Robert Holzweiss and the Gulf War and other conflicts in the 21st century of this idea of going to Congress. Do we still need to do that? And in fact, I don't have the link in front of me, but actually saw a newspaper article today about that issue, about going to Congress and Congress kind of getting back that power and kind of reducing presidential power in that way, that they can just, authorize military. What's the difference between a military strike, right, and going full conflict? For Truman, because he's involved in the Korean War here, Truman says the Korean War is actually his most difficult decision, not the atomic bomb. It's because he's a war veteran and he's putting soldiers on the ground in combat. He felt that was a very difficult thing for him to do and is under a lot of stress throughout the entirety of that last part of his second term. And then Darren makes a comment, Supreme Court also has a history of siding with big business and against workers. I'm not going to argue that at all. And Harry feels that, and that's why he's a real advocate against Taft-Hartley and the attack on labor unions. And so with that, do you have any questions, anybody? And you can unmute if you'd like, or ideas that might have sparked for using that in the classroom yourself. Post-lunch snooze. All right. And again, that presentation is already on the website.